Hello, I'm Sachi Inari Rizzo, curator of prints and drawings here at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. Every other month, I present a talk in the Print and Drawing Study Center and offer it virtually. For this season of Print Room Talks, we will be going back to the basics of printmaking. Oftentimes, people feel that there is so much jargon related to printmaking techniques and materials. In this series, we will explore various printmaking processes together and hopefully encourage an appreciation and love of prints. This slide outlines 4 different categories of printmaking processes that we will be covering over the course of the year. In September, we focused on relief prints, in which the block material is carved away, leaving the printed surface higher or in relief. This red in the slide represents the ink. Today, we will look at intaglio, which comes from the Italian word intagliare, in meaning into, and tagliare to cut. This category includes engraving, drypoint, mezzotint, etching, and aquatint. All cut marks are grooves and channels that are below the surface of the matrix. In the slide, the red ink fills the recessed areas. Each intaglio technique differs, though, in how the artist makes the marks on the matrix. The matrix in this case is usually a thin metal plate, preferably copper, but sometimes iron, steel, or zinc. The growing number of paper mills and the development of the rolling printing press were central to the rise of intaglio printmaking. Here on the left, we are looking at an engraving workshop with a printing press in the back. Intaglio prints are not printed by hand. More pressure is required to transfer the ink to the paper than in a relief print because the ink is below the surface of the plate. The intaglio printing press consists of a flat bed that moves horizontally from one end to another between 2 rollers operated by a wheel, crank, or motor. A contemporary intaglio press is on the right. Presses for relief printing spread the pressure over a large surface. With an intaglio press, the pressure is concentrated in the area where the plate is in contact with the upper roller. It is likely that the invention developed from a rolling pin of some sort sometime in the 15th century. Before printing, the top roller is adjusted for the height of the plate and the pressure checked. The ink is rubbed down into the incised lines or grooves of the plate, and its surface is wiped clean. The plate is placed face up on the intaglio press bed. A dampened sheet of paper is laid on top of the plate, followed by a piece of felt or a thin blanket that will distribute the pressure evenly when it is run through the press. The image on the print will be in reverse of the plate. There are some general characteristics that intaglio prints all share. Under close examination, the ink lines will appear raised on the surface of the paper like a ridge. This is because the pressure of the printing press roller forces the dampened paper into the incised lines and transfers the ink. That sense of three-dimensionality can be seen more easily, though, when you are looking at the work in person. The pressure of the press will also result in an indented impression of the metal plate, known as the plate mark. The plate's edges are beveled so that it doesn't cut the paper, though. In Jacques Villon's print, there is a border around the image. Some of it is due to the residual ink intentionally left on the plate and along the edge. However, if you look closely, you might be able to sense that there is also a debossed or indented mark. You won't find this with relief prints, screen prints, or lithographs. So then, can we assume that the plate mark is an identifying feature? Sometimes, although there are times when it was preferable and more fashionable to trim off the plate mark. I like showing Reynold Weidenauer's print because it provides samples of different intaglio techniques all in one print. As you can see, intaglio includes so many different techniques that we will be splitting them up and discussing them over 2 separate talks. In Weidenauer's print, the various images are cut into the surface of a metal plate, either manually or chemically. Manual means cutting directly into the plate with hand tools. This will include engraving, drypoint, and mezzotint. And chemical involves the use of acid that bites into the plate. This includes etching and aquatint. So for today, we will look just at the manual techniques. Keep in mind, though, that you can combine these techniques together. In general, we will look at prints that only use one technique. First, we will look at engraving. The main tool in engraving is the burin, which has a metal shaft with a lozenge-shaped tip. The Buhren's knob-like wooden handle is held in the palm of the hand, unlike how you would hold a pencil. The fingers hold the shaft as a guide. It has a V-shaped blade that the artist pushes through the metal in a direction away from the body. The blade cleanly removes the narrow sliver of metal, creating recessed grooves that will hold the ink. Buhrens come in different shapes and sizes. The plate is moved on a cushion to make a curve rather than changing the direction of the Buhren. It is customary to remove curls of metal that may be attached. After the plate is inked and its flat surface wiped clean, a dampened sheet of paper is placed on the top of the copper plate, covered by a felt or blanket. Together, they are forced through a press. The ink is drawn from the incised marks and transfers onto the paper, printing the image in a reverse. So engraving is the oldest in the intaglio family. When the first engravings appeared in southern Germany around 1430, goldsmiths and other metal workers used burins and punches to incise armor, religious pieces, and jewelry. Craftsmen were likely interested in recording their designs by printing them with ink on papers. Then the art of engraving was born, and the roller press followed soon after that. This is a 17th century print from the Metropolitan Museum of Art showing an engraving shop entitled New Inventions of Modern Times. In the background, men are flattening the copper plates. In the center, two men prepare a copper plate for printing. On the left, they work on the press. Finished prints are hung up to dry. We looked at the woodcuts of German Renaissance artist Albrecht Dürer in September. He learned engraving when he apprenticed at age 13 to his father, who was a goldsmith, and refined his skills under Michael Wohlgemuth, a painter and designer of woodcuts. A gifted artist, Dürer is one of the most significant printmakers as he elevated the medium to a creative art form with his technical skill, narrative, and especially his interest in the ideal bodily form. The satyr family seen here and other imaginative subjects like this were probably inspired by classical sculpture from antiquity and the myths of ancient Rome. And Dürer made at least 2 trips to Italy. The beautifully descriptive contours describe the mythological family, that is a satyr that is part man, part goat, and a woodland nymph with their child. The print only measures 4.5 by 2 3/4 inches, so the lines and areas are so extraordinarily fine. Dürer's Buhren strokes vary in length and density. Contemporary artist Andrew Raftery works primarily in engraving and teaches at Rhode Island School of Design. His work seen in the slide is a fairly large-scale engraving from his series Open House, 5 engraved scenes. He was approached to create a copy of one of Dürer's engravings in an attempt to gain further insight into how he created them. The act of copying works by the great masters is a common practice. It is a visual artist's way of conducting research. Raftery said, "It is only through copying that an artist can internalize the formal qualities, visual language, and techniques of another artist." On the left is Dürer's engraving St. Paul in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. In the center, a copy by a 17th century Flemish engraver, and on the right is a copy by Raftery. He attempted to use materials similar to what Dürer had available. Today, copper plates are rolled so they have a grain. Instead, Raftery hammered a plate, approximating the type of plate used in the 16th century. He discovered that the hammered plate doesn't have a distinct directional grain, so there is great freedom to make the lines. Here is a detail of all 3 prints. Raftery's copy took 40 hours of work. He commented, "I regret to say that even with magnification and the highest level of mental focus I could muster, I was never able to quite fit as many lines in any given area as existed in the original. Dürer's finesse eluded me." Another use of engraving was for reproductive prints based on other works of art. Reproductive prints allowed a larger public to gain access to paintings, sculptures, and frescoes that were only available to wealthy travelers or collectors beforehand. The prints were highly valued as skilled interpretations of the original. They were collectible and a source of income for artists. Reproductive engraving required a great deal of ingenuity and skill due to the differences between the print medium and the original. For example, how do you translate the color of a painting into a monochromatic medium? On the left is an example of a reproductive engraving by Paulus Pontius. On the right is Peter Paul Rubens's drawing in the collection of Harvard Art Museum. It was what Pontius used as a model. Rubens made the drawing in ink and chalk after a sculpted bust of Nero. Pontius was actually associated with the workshop of Rubens. In 1619, Rubens secured the means to copyright his paintings, drawings, and tapestry designs, which printmakers like Pontius in his workshop reproduced in engraving and woodcut. The drawing and engraving share a same likeness in the facial features. The engraving prints the image on the plate in reverse, though. Even though Pontius was emulating the drawing, he has made interesting changes. For example, he has set the bust in a darkened stone alcove that frames it nicely and makes the bust dramatically stand out. In general, there are greater contrasts between light and dark passages to give it a more sculptural presence. By the 1840s in the US, technological advances in printing presses, access to inexpensive paper and cloth bindings brought about an increase in the published reading materials that were affordable to the general public. In 1857, printers began steel facing, meaning that the engraver would work on the copper plate, then a thin coating of steel covered the plate, which allowed printers to increase the number of impressions. It was becoming common to include engraved illustrations in books. Illustrations such as St. Mary, St. Joseph, and Maumee Rivers brought picturesque views to the country to an audience who wanted to learn more about these unknown parts. In our print, William Momberger probably traveled around and provided the drawing that Vistus Balch adapted into engraving. It was included in the publication National Gallery of Landscape in 1869. And if you go online to used bookstores, you may still find bound copies of this publication. In this detail, you'll begin to understand how engravings like Balch had to create a linear language that could capture the rich tonalities seen in the reflections of the water and textures in the foliage of the drawing. Because of the nature of having to move the burin through the metal, the artist experiences some resistance. Characteristically, engraved lines look precise, smooth, and steady, not sketchy and spontaneous. The lines are often tapered at the end as well. Engravers developed an arsenal of techniques in line work. Hatching is the use of a series of parallel lines. When the parallel lines are engraved closer to one another, it will make the area appear darker. In Pontius's print, his lines follow the curves of the face, suggesting the underlying muscle, adding a feeling of volume and three-dimensional form. He has added cross-hatching, in which a set of parallel lines is set over another set of parallel lines at a different angle to yield a darker value. Another technique was known as the swelling line, which is a very natural movement in the medium. This may be most evident in the forehead. As the burin is pushed deeply into the metal, the line will widen with the increased pressure and then taper or get thinner, again, as the burin rises up. This is an engraving in the collection by French artist Sébastien Leclerc. This close-up of the figure's leg shows off that swelling line that curves around the forms of what are the muscles in the thigh. If we look closely at the hatching and cross-hatching, you'll note small dots, some within each diamond of the cross-hatching. This became known as the dot and lozenge style. Small dots and flecks are made easily with a burin. And if you want to examine and touch an engraving yourself, take out any banknote from your wallet. U.S. currency is printed through the U.S. Bureau of Engraving and Printing in Washington, D.C. and Fort Worth, Texas. Their presses exert 20 tons of pressure and produce 10,000 sheets per hour. Take this opportunity to look at the different types of lines used and also run your finger over the surface and you will notice that they were raised. We are jumping ahead to an engraving in the 20th century. Stanley William Hayter founded the innovative Atelier 17 at 17 Rue Champagne Première in Paris in 1933, which became a legendary printmaking studio. He moved it to New York in 1944 and kept the name. Atelier 17 attracted American students and European émigrés like surrealist artists Joan Miro, André Masson, and Max Ernst. The atmosphere was experimental, unconventional, and communal. Because of its collaborative nature, it became a place where ideas and techniques were freely exchanged. Hayter promoted printmaking for creative expression, not for reproduction. Of all the printmaking mediums, Hayter's own work focused primarily on engraving. In diptych, seen here, Hayter makes long fluid lines that curve and loop between the two sheets. It brings to mind the automatic drawings of the surrealists or the continuous movement in abstract expressionism. Atelier 17's influence continued to spread through this country. Many of the artists trained at the studio later created influential printmaking departments at dozens of universities and colleges. Stephen Sorman, whose archive is at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art, enjoys using all printmaking processes he has at his disposal. In Not Nearly, but Before My Brothers, he only uses engraving. He has worked on 6 different plates printed in a color-tinted black ink. Sorman and Hayter demonstrate how engraving can be used for expressive movement, and in this case, almost reminiscent of brushstrokes. This was printed down at Echo Press at Indiana University in Bloomington. Atelier 17 was also an inspiration for the proliferation of printmaking workshops like Echo Press that opened in the 20th century through today. Among the American artists to work at Atelier 17 was Jackson Pollock, who made his only known 11 prints at Hayter's New York workshop from 1944 to 1945. However, he never exhibited or published them. While engraving does not lend itself well to spontaneity, unlike ink or paint, Pollock's untitled print still provides us with early glimpses of his energetic strokes and all-over composition that would characterize his mature paintings. You may have also noted the irregularity of the line quality, particularly the fuzzy lines in some areas. That is because the print is a combination of engraving and drypoint. We will transition to the next intaglio manual process called drypoint. A variety of sharp tools can be used to make marks on the metal plate. In this photo, the artist is using a drypoint needle, which is held more upright like a pencil. As the drypoint needle scratches the metal plate, it pushes the metal up on either side of the line. This fine piece of metal that is raised on the sides of the line is known as a burr and gives drypoint its characteristic appearance. In contrast, for engraving, the burin cuts through the plate cleanly as it lifts the metal out. Any burrs on the surface are scraped away before printing. When inked, the burr holds extra ink and results in fuzzy lines, the hallmark of drypoint. As the plate is repeatedly run through the press, the burr will break down under the press's pressure. For this reason, the number of total prints or addition is small when it involves drypoint. Sometimes the burr may last for only 20 to 30 impressions. This is the case where it is important to look at the quality of each impression and the richness of the burr. Robert Kittness's study for trees shows some of the range of line quality and density of line possible in drypoint, from fine to thick. Early examples of drypoint date to around 1480 with the Master of the House book, and of course Albrecht Dürer, who created 3 drypoints, all in 1512. Rembrandt incorporated drypoint into his etchings, which are among his most famous works. Arthur Heinzelman was a skillful American printmaker known for his portraits and figurative works. In the entombment, the areas where the burr held more ink add to the softness of the hair and help to emphasize folds in fabrics and areas in shadow. Although Edgar Shaheen was an accomplished painter, he became enchanted by printmaking and devoted most of his time to working in that medium, portraying the bourgeoisie as well as the ordinariness of street life. In Shaheen's study of this fashionable Italian woman, drypoint enhances the textures of the feathers in her hat. The rich black areas of her blouse, made up of numerous individual lines, are velvety. Charles Dahlgren was a Chicago artist who enjoyed painting landscapes outdoors, making visits to Brown County, Indiana. Only needing a drypoint needle and a copper plate, it would be possible to work on a plate directly from nature. Note the effective use of drypoint in the foliage and along the shore, giving much definition to the shadows. This is a drypoint by German expressionist painter Max Beckmann, who served as an orderly in the medical corps during World War I. Although he was eager to volunteer, in 1915 he suffered a nervous breakdown after witnessing the inhumanity of war. He was already an emerging, talented artist, painting dramatic romantic scenes of tragedy. His works directly after the war were often claustrophobic and devoid of any highly saturated color characteristic of his painting before the war. Beckmann made numerous paintings and prints based on religious themes during this time period. The spare, scratched lines seen in Beckmann's Descent from the Cross contributes to the barren setting for his horrific portrayal. And the metal burr can be removed from with a scraper, which will result in fine, dry-looking lines like we're seeing here, or lines that are lightly scratched will not form a burr. The final intaglio technique we will discuss today is mezzotint. The forms of intaglio techniques we've looked at are based purely on line, even when creating different values. Mezzotint is a process that gives a range of continuous tone from light to dark without using lines. German artist Ludwig von Siegel developed an early form of mezzotint in the early 1640s. Prince Rupert of the Rhine and his assistant are usually credited with further improvements and refinement. The name comes from the Italian word mezzotinto, or half tint. Before working on an image, the entire surface of the plate must be systematically roughened using what's called a mezzotint rocker. The tool has a curved, finely toothed blade. Rockers come in various widths and gauges, as we can see on the right. The artist rocks the tool over the plate in the same direction. When the plate has been covered, the process is repeated in another direction. This continues again and again in different angles until the plate is covered with tiny burrs. If it was inked and printed at this point, the result would be an entire field of a rich, deep black. The artist works from dark to light by scraping and burnishing the textured surface to soften and smooth areas to varying degrees. This will decrease the ability to hold ink and create the subtlest tonal gradations and highlights. The mezzotint burr will wear down through repeated printings, so the number of impressions are limited. This is a mezzotint by Robert Kipnis. On the right, you may be able to see in the lighter areas a pattern of lines made by the rocker, almost reminiscent of a fine mesh. Also notice that mezzotint doesn't produce any true lines. Kipnis started off as a painter and learned mezzotint in the early 1990s. He described, in mezzotint, you draw from light. You start with velvety black and gradually introduce degrees of illumination, and as your focus sharpens, you slowly evolve shapes and space from darkness. Because of its capacity to create such beautiful tonalities, mezzotints gained popularity in portraiture and copies after paintings, especially in the 18th century. The mezzotint provided the rising bourgeoisie with a collectible form of art that was more affordable than paintings that the aristocrats commissioned. However, mezzotint decreased in popularity with the invention of lithography, a new printing method in 1798. Lithography could be produced quickly and inexpensively in unlimited quantities. Photography and photo-based processes also contributed to its decline. Mezzotint nearly became a lost art. In the late 19th century, there was an increased interest in using etching for original art. In their desire for continuous tone, attention turned to mezzotint again. British artist Sir Frank Short began work using mezzotint to reproduce works by John Constable and Turner. However, he received recognition as well for his own original mezzotints, largely landscapes, like as seen here, reveling in his ability to capture different atmospheric conditions. Short also passed along his knowledge and enthusiasm for the medium to his students. While the first attraction to mezzotint was for its capability to yield a wide range of tones, many contemporary artists are attracted to the rich quality of the blacks inherent to the medium. We are looking at Fred Mershimer's Moonlight here. The moon's reflection on the water seems to magically glow. For Carol Wax and Donald Firth, mezzotint was ideal to depict subtle shadows of nighttime, the soft light, and diffuse forms seen through the fog. As well as being a printmaker, Carol Wax is an authority on mezzotint and has written the leading book on its history and technique. In Foggy Night, Wax actually uses the gritty carborundum to make her roughened ground, pioneered by African-American artist Doc Thrash. Also included a couple of images of the main tools used to accomplish these delicate tonalities. This is an image of a scraper that has a triangular blade. It is used to gradually cut the tips of the burr. The more time and care that is taken to scrape at the ground, the wider the range of grays are possible. The burnisher is a rounded tool that smooths the burrs. According to Wax, the burnisher creates different levels in the surface of the plate, although not to the extreme degree that scraping does. This often makes it easier to achieve fine details. She continues, scraped areas tend to yield a more matte-like appearance, while the close clusters of black and white dots produced by the burnisher can make highlights shimmer. While artists like Kipnis, Wax, First, and Mershimer continue to make mezzotints, it is still relatively rare. This is due to the daunting and physical demands of the process. In Walter Chamberlain's 1972 book on etching and engraving, he claims it may take days to achieve a perfectly rounded rocked ground. Carol Wax says that she can rock an 18 by 24 inch copper plate in 50 to 80 hours. And we are going to end with Mershimer's epically large mezzotint of Niagara Falls that measures an incredible 38 by 28 inches. He is known for his New York City images of skyscrapers, actually. This print is not only a tribute to this natural wonder, but to the medium itself. It is the climax of a 6-year project beginning with a trip to Niagara Falls in 2016 and 13 drawings exploring different views. The print encompassed about 2 years between the rocking, working on the plate, printing, and editioning. Thank you for joining me today. I will continue looking at intaglio techniques on Wednesday, January 18th at 2 o'clock. We will discuss acid-based processes, including etching and aquatint.